How does the Rocky montage work? There's no debating that the Rocky franchise has earned its spot in movie history. The Academy Award-winning underdog tale that took a slab of pure Pennsylvania beef, put it through endless trials and grindings before smothering it in heart-stopping cheese. Like the Philadelphia cheesesteak that it is. But more than anything else in this tale of Sylvester Stallone's imaginary friend,
I want to thank my imaginary friend Rocky Balboa for being the best friend I ever had.
More than drinking raw eggs, eating lightning, and crapping thunder, more than Adrian and I must break you, and eye-cutting and fool-pitying and Paulie's inexplicable shark-jumping robot.
What the hell is this?
Seriously, why did Paulie get a robot? Even more than the actual boxing itself, we remember the montage. After Richard Halsey and Scott Conrad won the 1976 Academy Award for Best Editing for the most invigorating 2 minutes and 43 seconds in American film history, all 6 Rocky films that followed had at least one training montage. All variations on the theme of Rocky gets good at boxing. The Rocky films eventually got it down to a formula that so many others have copied. Other sports movies, action films, fantasy adventure flicks, Disney princesses, cult comedies, Oscar-winning period dramas, no-budget internet review shows, acclaimed autobiographies about surviving both an oppressive fundamentalist regime and the rejection of your adopted secular society that falsely offered a sense of escape. To the point where we all probably think we know how it works. Cut from shots of our hero doing the task that will ready their bodies and or minds for the climatic struggle, show a lot of things happening at once, remind everyone of what's going on, and with every shot you show a little improvement and okay, yes, I've seen Team America too.
Even Rocky had a montage.
Point is, the average moviegoer might define montage simply as a series of quick cuts set to music designed to keep the pace up before the final act. But the truth is, this is also montage, cut from Rocky getting ready for the fight to Apollo doing the same. Apollo with his team, Rocky alone. Still montage, just less obvious when there isn't blaring music under it. And this is barely a montage at all. Sure, it has the Rocky theme under it, but this is close to regular continuity editing. Each shot just shows a new stage of a long run with no footage from outside this action. So, what is montage? Well, the word comes from the French verb monter, meaning to assemble or to mount. In the earliest silent films, editing was done to be invisible, to disguise cuts by doing things like cutting on motion. But in a montage, you feel each cut. You feel the transition from one shot to the next. The first people to use the term were the Soviets. At the All-Soviet State University of Cinematography, filmmakers started to explore how film could be used to advance ideas. This school gave us the most influential theorist of montage, and probably one of the most important figures in film history, Sergei Eisenstein. In a dialectic approach to film form, Eisenstein boldly declared that art is always conflict. He drew from Karl Marx's reading of Georg Hegel's concept of the dialectic, that all conscious human thought is derived from the synthesis of disparate parts of a dynamic world. And it was within this dynamic process that history is created. Thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. Thesis, the oppression of capitalism. Antithesis, the oppressed proletariat. Synthesis, socialist revolution. I'm massively oversimplifying, but still. Eisenstein saw this dialectical process in film. Just as 2 frames played in sequence give the illusion of movement, so multiple shots in sequence creates a sense of meaning. He experimented with these techniques to create the boldest works of communist propaganda of his time. It sounds scary, I know, we're talking about actual Soviet propaganda, but the dirty secret of every Hollywood movie you've ever seen is they all use these techniques. And no, Senator McCarthy, that doesn't make them communist, it just makes them good storytellers. And what is storytelling but the art and method of making somebody feel something? So what are those methods? Well, Eisenstein was nice enough to list them for us. In Methods of Montage, he named 5 types of montage. listed in order of increasing complexity. The simplest form is the metric montage. Here, the length of the cuts determine the mood of the piece. No regard to content, just cut from one image to another regardless of the content of the shot. Okay, stop that. Eisenstein cited an example from his own film, October, 10 Days That Shook the World. In a time before sound, he used these quick cuts to simulate machine gun fire. By the way, all the examples that Eisenstein uses are from his own films, so, get used to that. I couldn't find any examples of purely metric montage in Rocky, or really outside of silent movies, because today, more often than not, when shots are cut based on specific lengths, it's done to music. Eisenstein did this too. In this scene from Alexander Nevsky, he cuts at the end of each musical phrase of Sergei Prokofiev's score. See that? Or rather, hear that? Feel that? Eisenstein called sound the filmic fourth dimension. So what does this have to do with Rocky? Okay, gonna fly now. Downbeat to bar 13 and watch my tempo. Cut! 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. Cut! 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 3, 4. Cut! You see? It's cut on the beat. It's cut to accentuate Bill Conti's score. The cutting gets even faster during the guitar solo, matching the mood of the score. This was before music videos took off, but to this day, they often use this same technique. Cut, 2, cut, 4, cut, 2, 3, 4, cut, 2, 3, 4. The second most complex method is the rhythmic montage, where the movement within the frame is the main driver of mood. In this famous sequence from Battleship Potemkin, Eisenstein uses different forms of movement down the steps to drive the scene. The downward movement of people running, downward movement of soldiers marching, and of course, the downward movement of the carriage bouncing. All mixed with emotional close-ups from the crowd being massacred. Likewise, in Rocky II, editors Stanford C. Allen and Janice Hampton cut from the vertical movement of the one-handed pull-up to the vertical movement of the sit-up, from punching a speed bag to punching mitts, and from bending down after rows to squatting with a log on his shoulders, then visually matching the log to the barbell, all mixed with emotional close-ups from Mick. Same basic techniques, repeated movement, intense emotion. It's just selling athleticism, not communism. The third method is the tonal montage, where shots are chosen for their individual aesthetic qualities. Eisenstein did a film called Old and New, which relied heavily on this method. It's a history of Russian agriculture, and he uses multiple shots of pastoral landscapes to romanticize the working class, letting the beauty of the shot guide the feeling. Rocky Balboa's training montage uses shots that were color-graded bluish, often with light sources that create harsh shadows, before ending his run up the museum steps during a snowstorm. The tone of these shots seem to emphasize how old Rocky's gotten. He's in his winter years. Conversely, these shots from Rocky III seem innocent and carefree. Rocky and Adrian on a motorcycle, Rocky and Adrian kissing in a field of flowers. But then it cuts to Clubber Lang. And this is after a montage of Rocky's incredible success with Clubber Lang's own training montage. This is also when the cutting started getting even more ambitious. Instead of cutting from one person to the other, Clubber and Rocky occupy the same space. Here we get to the fourth method, overtonal montage, where the juxtaposed emotional tones of whole sequences create a new feeling. You see it throughout the series, shots of Rocky struggling, shots of Rocky elated. A simple idea. But that idea can become more complex if it's undercut. Images of Rocky's success and Clubber Lang's struggle creates the shared emotions of pride and yet unease. A similar montage in Rocky V tries to cram in even more ideas. Rocky training Tommy Gunn, Rocky Jr. training himself, Adrian's worry, George Washington Duke plotting his next move. Here, the editing is so dense, it relies heavily on overlaying shots, in an attempt to cram in as much information as possible. This is montage as plot overload. So here we can start to see the fifth method of montage, the most complex one, and the one that Eisenstein was most interested in. The intellectual montage. the montage that created a complex idea. This method is a lot more common than you think. Often it's as simple as showing the two opponents in a fight training in separate locations, each one preparing to fight the other. Rocky and Ivan Drago, Rocky and Mason the Line Dixon, and lastly, Adonis Creed and Pretty Ricky Conlon. By intercutting their training sessions, we start to see the fight before it happens. But that's an idea simple enough to be merely overtonal. For an intellectual montage, look at Creed. It states its main idea in the script.
I ain't training if you don't get the treatment. So if I fight, you fight.
And so Creed's montage visually links Adonis' training sessions to Rocky's cancer treatment. Ryan Coogler even matches shots of Creed looking frustrated. One in the gym, one in the hospital. But I think Eisenstein's goal for the intellectual montage was even more ambitious, even more abstract. Consider this scene from Battleship Potemkin, where he links a gesture done by a priest with the cross to a similar gesture done by an officer with a sword, linking religious power to military power. Or this sequence in October. A capitalist invokes God, and so Eisenstein shows a series of religious icons, going from Christian imagery to Paleolithic fetishes, expanding and deconstructing the very idea of God. Ambitious stuff. In my opinion, the only true Eisensteinian intellectual montage in the Rocky movies is in Rocky IV. Yes, that one. The dumbest one. The one with the robot. Of course, Rocky IV is also the most overtly political of the series, so it almost makes sense. Eisenstein once insulted provisional government leader Alexander Kerensky by cutting from him to a statue of Napoleon, and from his stately uniform to a peacock. Stallone took the Soviets' own techniques and used them to insult their champion. Even though Rocky and Drago do the same exercises, Rocky does them in a scenic wilderness with commoners, while Drago is intercut with computer readouts and gauges. So like how Eisenstein called Kerensky a dictator and a peacock, Stallone calls Drago a soulless machine. All the subtlety of propaganda, basically. This sequence also builds on the principles of metric montage. This, by far, has the fastest cutting of any Rocky movie. 1 second of Drago on the arm cycle, 1 second of the gauge measuring him, 14 frames of his handler, 12 frames of Drago, visual match to 16 frames of Rocky, 15 frames on a tighter shot of Drago, 16 frames on a tighter shot of Rocky, 15 on Drago, 29 on Rocky, before finishing the sequence with 17 frames on Rocky in a new angle, before moving outside to start a new sequence of Drago lifting barbells intercut with Rocky lifting rocks, cutting just as fast. Yeah, the most complex montage is the one that involves Russians. Go figure. But complex doesn't necessarily mean better. Compare this to the montage in the first film. Rocky discovered its montage. Each of these scenes were listed separately in the shooting script and filmed covertly in spaces around Philadelphia. The rhythm and pacing were found in the editing room. And the shots are relatively long, which has the benefit of showing off Stallone's athletic abilities, instead of disguising them with cuts. And the finale of the montage? Well, this sequence made Stallone a star, and made the steps to the Philadelphia Museum of Art more famous than the museum itself.
I never knew there was valuable pictures in his building, you know?
So in subsequent films, Stallone tried to capture the feeling of that moment, mainly by doing them bigger and faster. In Rocky, Avildsen staged Balboa's triumphant bound up the steps of the art museum with a single shot. You get to see the entire run in one go, and as the camera swings around, you get to share in the dizzy sensation that Rocky must have. He ends it with a low angle to emphasize the distance that he covered, and then a close-up in slow motion to sell his elation. 3 cuts. When Stallone took over directing in Rocky II, he kept Avildsen's basic setup, but he makes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cuts. This shot only seems to cover up the jump cut between 2 takes of the same angle. And these 2 shots flow into each other without interruption, and they're clearly from the same take. This shot in between them only seems to kill time until the music finishes. And this is even before Rocky IV, when Stallone seemed to think that topping the run up the steps meant replacing it with a run up a mountain, replacing the handheld Steadicam with helicopter shots, punctuating the climb with half-second whip pans just for texture, and saving his longest shot for The beacons are lit! Gondor calls for aid! But when Ryan Coogler took over for Creed, he gave the idea new life. Keeping the exercise, keeping the sweat and the struggle, keeping the running. But that final run doesn't emphasize the vertical movement of the original, but its circular movement. And the steps?
When you get to the top, you think you can fly.
He keeps the climb, but he understands their new significance. In 1976, they were an obstacle to conquer. But in 2015, they're nostalgic.
You know, if you look hard enough, you can see your whole life from up here.
Man, Creed got robbed at the Oscars. Eisenstein himself said that the brain responds the same way to a simple montage or a complex one. Each of these techniques necessarily builds off one another, and all of them work together to create that sense of overcoming the odds you get in each sequence. And in a franchise as long-running as the Rocky films, we can start to see through different directors and different editors variations on this same technique. And it's within these variations that we can start to see why one idea works and another doesn't, why one might feel stale and another might feel profound. The irony is that Rocky, in creating a great example of montage, limited popular understanding of what a montage is. It's not simply a compression of time, or...
A montage is what, Abed?
It's a movie apologizing for reality.
Montage is not a movie apologizing for reality. Montage is a movie's way of creating reality. The montage is the beautiful combination of image upon image that guides us through the emotional realities of the characters we watch. That guidance helps us feel Rocky's struggle. We sweat with him, we sprint with him, and we feel his pride, all because of a tradition of filmmaking that understands how our minds react to the moving image. And that tradition is worth our understanding. Montage theory. It made Rocky great. Thanks. Communism.